Assessment for Adult Learning, PBLA with Ms. Educator. Meet Ms. Educator. Ms. Educator is teaching a course for the very first time. She has zero teaching experience, but she has 15 years of experience in her field. Ms. Educator considers herself an expert and frequently gives her advice to others. The course that Ms. Educator will be teaching is 18 hours and spans over 5 weeks. She spent all summer planning and by making a list of topics to teach her students.
These are the 9 principles from American Association for Higher Education Principle of Good Practices for Assessing Student Learning. We will be using these principles to guide the mistakes of solution for these scenarios. One of the 9 principles is the assessment of student learning begins with educational values. Issue. Ms. Cator shows lack of educational values which has influenced what she's going to assess and how she's going to assess. Unfortunately, educational mission and values are compromised here, and the result is poor and false test results from her classes, and that she's not learning or going to improve on her own way of teaching. Solution. Ms. Cator must be aware of the values and the purpose of teaching the course to her student, which is to assess them and use the assessment result in helping bring the improvement. Second principle is assessment is most effective when it reflects on understanding of learning as multidimensional, integrated, and reveal in performance over time. Issue. Ms. Cator fails to assess her students' understanding of knowledge because she is only using one assessment method. Solution is she should be using many different types of method to assess her students. Bloom's taxonomy is the way to go. Bloom's taxonomy, higher order of thinking, involves in top 3 levels evaluation, synthesis, and analysis. Thus, by utilizing Ms. Cator will create more engaging learning environment. Lower order of thinking involves our application, comprehension, and knowledge. She also found out about the online test exam rule after she created all her lectures. She needs different ways to summative assess her students. Basically, her student needs to understand a concept, learn it, and apply it in assignments, tests, discussion posts, whatever form of assessment. She should determine how her student studies so she can assess them properly. The third principle is assessment works best when the program it seeks to improve have clear, explicit stated purpose. Issue is Ms. Carter only wants her benefit and comfort. She doesn't want to reflect her students nor her mission value of school's benefit. The solution would be a course could be arranged in any of the following ways: chronological from concrete to abstract, theory to application, around a set of questions, around a set of practical problems or case studies, or start by making a list of topics. However we choose to organize the course, the goal should be to create a structure that supports the learning objective we have identified. Fourth principle is assessment requires attention to outcomes but also an equally to experience that led to those outcomes. Issue is content is squeezed into lectures, which means that in one lecture one chapter is complete and it's pretty heavy thing. There's too much information for a student to digest in one setting. Not to mention her method of teaching is not ideal. There was a lot of effort in planning the schedule but no clear or planned purpose in a lecture. The solution would be there should be a development of the course structure which refers to the choice of topics and the organization and the sequencing of the course content. Fifth principle is assessment works best when it's ongoing, not episodic, which means that educators must continuously monitor how they assess their students. Students' assessment is not a one time effort.
The issues that we identify is that the professor does not know her student population well. In regards to the sixth principle, which is assessment foster a wider improvement when representatives from across the educational communities are involved. The professor in this situation does not know her student population well and has only developed her course based on her own experience and knowledge. Another issue regarding the situation is the level of difficulty of the assignments. The professor had mentioned that she will be making the first week test a lot harder than the last week. This goes against the seventh principle, which is assessment makes a difference when it begins with issues of use and eliminates questions that people really care about. Our solution is that the professor should align her assignment to base off the learning outcome, since the students will have more connection to the learning outcome, since the material that they're learning are based off the learning outcome. Furthermore, when deciding on the kind of assessment activities that the professor would like to use, there are some questions that they should keep in mind. What will the students work on the activity, such as multiple choice, essays, or presentation? And how will this determine their level of competence to the target learning objective? Another question is, how will my assessment of their work help guide students' practice and improve their quality of work? And the last question to keep in mind is, how will the assessment outcome for the class guide my teaching practice? Which goes against the eighth principle, which is assessment is more likely to lead to improvement when it is part of a larger set of conditions that promotes change. The last issue is that the professor is prioritizing her own comfort over the responsibility to the students. This goes against the ninth principle, which is through assessment, educators meets their responsibility to the students and the public.
In conclusion, we believe Ms. Educator has potential for a very effective class. Considering important aspects of teaching and assessing, like the principles of good practice for assessing student learning, as well as Bloom's taxonomy, Ms. Educator can effectively plan, assess, and analyze for successful assessment. Like we have said before, assessment is most effective when it reflects on understanding of learning as multidimensional, integrated, and revealed in performance over time. Assessment is an ongoing process that cannot be completed altogether in a few online tests. Effective assessment requires attention to outcomes, but also attention to experiences that lead to those outcomes.